In the age of Pharaohs, curse written in stone. They told you the pyramids were tombs, but what if they were warnings? The stone opens like a wound. What you thought was history is only the first layer of ash, concealing voices that were never meant to rise again. Each hieroglyph carved into the walls is not language but incision, a surgery upon the human mind, written in symbols that outlive flesh. You are not reading this, you are being read by it. The first carved warning. The desert does not forgive memory. It buries, yes, but never erases. When you step before the ancient walls, you are not encountering stone, but a mirror pressed against time. Every groove of the hieroglyphs is deeper than it should be, as if the chisel was not meant to carve rock, but to pierce consciousness. You notice it immediately. The shapes pull at you, bending thought into alignment with something older than human history. Archaeologists catalog them as symbols of falcons, suns, ankhs, and serpents, but the eye does not see the symbol, the mind sees the fracture. It is the same fracture that priests once whispered about, that words are not written to preserve meaning, but to replace it. What would it mean if every text, every inscription, every monument was not a message for you, but a mechanism upon you? Consider the nature of writing itself. We believe language is a tool of communication, but the Rosetta Stone itself revealed a darker possibility, that writing was never meant to be understood by all. Its three parallel scripts are not for translation, they are for division. Hieroglyphic for the gods and priests, demotic for the scribes, Greek for the rulers. Three layers of meaning fractured into silos, so no single class ever holds the entire truth. The message is not the text, the message is the fracture of perception. This is why rulers etched laws into stone and buried them beneath temples, not to preserve them but to ensure the illusion of permanence. The first carved warning, then, is not in the words themselves but in their permanence. Stone teaches you to believe in eternity. Stone convinces you that what is written must be true because it endures. Yet memory is not eternal, it decays, it warps, it collapses. And so the priests who marked the walls with sacred geometry knew they were performing a psychological sleight of hand. They forced fragile human belief into alignment with an illusion of immortality. You bow to it because it does not crumble before you. Science confirms this manipulation in subtle ways. Consider the illusory truth effect uncovered in cognitive psychology. Repeat a statement often enough and the mind begins to accept it as fact regardless of its validity. Now stretch this across centuries, across stone that has withstood the desert sun. The lie petrifies into truth not because of evidence but because of duration. The pyramid becomes not merely a structure but a weapon of cognitive conditioning. If it has stood for 4,000 years, how could it be wrong? But even deeper lies the geometry. The placement of hieroglyphs within strict proportions echoes the same ratios found in sacred architecture, in Fibonacci spirals in the golden section. Geometry itself is not decorative, it is invasive. Modern neuroscience demonstrates that the human brain responds predictably to proportion and symmetry, releasing dopamine when confronted with balance and unease when patterns fracture. The temple builders knew this without brain scans. They knew that by aligning text within cosmic ratios, they could engrave awe into the very neurology of their worshippers. The wall is not read, the wall reads you, calibrating your thought to its proportions. What then of the curses carved beneath these stones? Whosoever disturbs this tomb shall never rest in eternity. Scholars dismiss these as superstition. But look closer, what is a curse but a weaponized suggestion? Placebo and nocebo effects reveal how belief alone alters physiology, even mortality. People healed by sugar pills, people sickened by harmless substances, all because the mind believed. What happens then when a culture conditions you from birth that words carved in eternal stone are divine? The curse is not mystical, it is neurological programming. Those who believed it died, not because God struck them down, but because their minds fulfilled the script engraved upon them. The first carved warning is this: stone does not preserve truth. It preserves illusions that the mind can no longer distinguish from truth. Each glyph is less a letter than a command, an instruction to alter your perception of time, mortality, and reality itself. When you stand before them, you are not gazing at history. You are submitting to an experiment whose results have already been etched into your nervous system. So when you feel the unease in front of those ancient walls, ask yourself, are you reading the stone or is the stone rewriting you? The Chamber of Echoes. Imagine stepping into the inner sanctum of a pyramid. The air is heavy, not with dust but with resonance. Each stone block presses against the other in such precision that even modern engineers cannot account for the seamlessness. Yet what truly unsettles you is not the construction but the sound. Whisper and the chamber does not return your voice to you, it swallows it whole, then releases it back, warped, delayed, multiplied. It feels less like you are speaking, and more like the pyramid itself is answering. Ancient priests called these chambers the mouths of the gods, but modern acousticians reveal something stranger. These rooms are designed with standing waves in mind, frequencies that amplify, reverberate, and disorient. The human brain is exquisitely vulnerable to sound. Low-frequency vibrations alter heart rate, induce anxiety, even hallucinations. Military research in the 20th century explored infrasound as a weapon, capable of making soldiers panic or faint without any visible attack. The priests of Egypt needed no laboratories, their temples already achieved this. By chanting in resonant frequencies, by striking drums that echoed through stone, they turned architecture into neurology. The chamber was not a place of prayer, but of programming. Think of the Milgram experiment in psychology. Ordinary people, told by authority to administer shocks, obeyed commands even to the point of harming others. Authority bends perception, but what if authority is not a man in a white coat, but a voice amplified by the architecture of eternity? A whisper bouncing back as thunder, framed by flickering torchlight, delivered not as suggestion, but as command. The sound itself would not feel external, it would feel internal, as though thought itself was speaking from beyond. This is not faith, this is compliance induced by resonance. Now consider how the human brain processes echoes. Neurological studies show that delayed feedback in hearing can induce disorientation, loss of agency, and even dissociation. When your voice returns to you fractured, lagged, multiplied, the brain cannot locate self from environment. The pyramid chamber weaponizes this dissociation. You become unable to tell if the command is yours or another's, if the words are prayer or curse. It is the same collapse of identity described in split-brain patients, when the left and right hemispheres operate independently and one hand acts without the other's awareness. The self shatters and suggestion slips in through the cracks. History calls this ritual worship, but beneath the veil of incense and ritual lies something far colder, an experiment in controlling consciousness. What happens when generations of minds are reshaped not through argument, but through sound waves that make the body tremble and the identity dissolve? The priests were not teaching myth, they were engineering compliance. The stone chambers were laboratories of perception. And every person who entered left with a mind subtly altered, their sense of reality bent into alignment with the geometry of power. The modern world believes itself immune to such methods, yet the principle has only evolved. Stadium chants, political rallies, even advertising jingles all exploit the same neurological vulnerability. Echo, rhythm, repetition, tools that bypass thought and anchor themselves directly in nervous tissue. What the ancients carved in stone, we now broadcast in waves. The curse written in stone never died, it became the air itself. You begin to understand then that these pyramids are not monuments to death, but engines of suggestion. The dead were offerings, the living were the experiment. Every whisper that vanishes into stone still waits, still resonates, still reshapes. So when you hear your own voice echo in silence, how certain are you that it is yours at all? The geometry of enslavement. Step back from the hieroglyphs and listen beyond the echoes, and you begin to notice what should never be ignored, the structure itself. The pyramid is not simply a mountain of stone, it is geometry crystallized into power. Each angle, each proportion, each alignment to the stars is not decoration, it is a language that bypasses words. Where text can be misread, geometry cannot. It writes directly into the nervous system. The ancients called it Mot, divine order. But in the hidden library, the word acquires a darker translation, enforced symmetry. Consider how the Great Pyramid is aligned almost perfectly to true north, its error less than a fraction of a degree, an accuracy we can barely reproduce today. The perimeter encodes pi, the height mirrors the golden ratio, the shafts align with Orion and Sirius. These are not coincidences, they are algorithms. The builders understood that when a structure reflects cosmic order, the human mind inside it unconsciously aligns itself to that order. This is no temple of worship, it is a tuning device. Modern neuroscience confirms what the priests intuited. Exposure to geometric patterns, spirals, fractals, symmetries synchronizes brainwave activity. The occipital lobe responds not as if it is seeing, but as if it is entering. EEG studies of subjects staring at sacred geometry show coherence in alpha and theta waves, the same states triggered in meditation or hypnosis. The pyramid, then, is hypnosis made stone. Its dimensions are less about housing bodies and more about programming brains. Think of Zeno's paradox. Achilles can never catch the tortoise because the distance can always be halved infinitely. A trick of logic collapses perception of motion. Sacred geometry operates the same way. It convinces you that order exists where none may truly exist, trapping the mind in an infinite loop of ratios and symmetries. You begin to feel awe not because the structure demands it, but because your neurology has been hijacked to experience awe in the face of proportion. The building is not passive, the building is an operator. And yet behind this geometry lies suppression. The Library of Alexandria was burned not merely to erase text, but to erase awareness of what geometry could do to the mind. For if people knew that ratios could enslave thought, they would see through the monuments of power, from temples to cathedrals to modern skyscrapers. Every age has built its geometry to control the gaze, to fracture the sense of scale, to reduce the individual beneath the shadow of ratios too vast to comprehend. You are told you are small because you stand beneath stone that has been tuned to make you feel small. Now recall the blind spot illusion in psychology. Your eye has a hole in vision where the optic nerve passes, yet the brain fills it with fabricated imagery so you never notice. Geometry does the same at a civilizational scale. It hides the blind spots in history, in self, in perception, filling them with symmetry so convincing you forget the fracture. A pyramid becomes not just a monument, but a patch over collective amnesia. It tells you, do not look beyond, do not ask what came before, because the ratio is eternal. And perhaps this is the most devastating truth. We think of the pyramids as relics of the dead, but they are still alive, not in stone, but in your nervous system. Every church spire, every obelisk, every modern glass tower that reflects the heavens continues the same curse. Geometry enslaves not by chains, but by awe. So when you marvel at the perfection of ancient stone, ask yourself, is it you who admires the pyramid, or is it the pyramid that has engineered the part of you that admires? The silence beneath the sand. The desert is not empty. It is full of silence so dense it feels like a substance pressing against your skin, crawling into your ears, wrapping itself around your breath. Step too far from the Nile and you feel it. The silence becomes unbearable, as if the world itself has withdrawn. The pyramids were not placed here by accident. They were carved into the geography of absence, into the place where silence itself becomes a weapon. Ancient texts describe the desert as the land of the dead, but the hidden library suggests another reading. It is the land where thought fractures under silence. Modern psychology confirms what the priests already knew: prolonged exposure to silence destabilizes the mind. Sensory deprivation chambers designed in the 20th century to study human perception reveal that within hours the brain begins to hallucinate. The mind cannot tolerate absence. It fabricates voices, patterns, visions. The desert is an infinite deprivation chamber, and the pyramids were its amplification devices. Imagine a pilgrim walking across miles of sand, no sound but wind, no water but distant mirages. By the time they reach the temple, their mind would already be unraveling. The silence primes the nervous system for collapse. The chanting priests, the flickering torches, the resonant stone chambers, all of it lands not on a stable psyche, but on one already cracked open by the desert's void. What seems like spiritual revelation is nothing but the breaking point of sensory starvation. Think of the Rosenhin experiment in psychiatry. Healthy people placed in asylums began to experience their identities eroding under constant invalidation. What was real no longer mattered. What the institution declared became reality. The desert performs the same role as the asylum. It tells you your senses are untrustworthy, your mind cannot be trusted, only the silence speaks the truth. The pilgrim's breakdown was not madness, it was conditioning. And history has concealed this function under the guise of myth. The 40 days and 40 nights motif, repeated in countless traditions, is not arbitrary. It is the length of time required to strip the mind of its anchors, to hollow out the self until it can be filled with another's order. Fasting in the desert, visions in the wilderness, prophets returning with commandments. Each is the same pattern. The silence collapses the old self, and the geometry, sound, and inscription build the new. We imagine these were paths to enlightenment, but the chilling question remains, what if they were experiments in obedience? The desert silence makes the mind fragile. The temple fills it with patterns of control, and the curse carved in stone ensures the fracture never heals. This cycle is not spiritual awakening, it is psychological colonization. Even now, studies on isolation confirm that silence alters brain chemistry. Dopamine levels drop, cortisol spikes, hallucinations bloom like weeds. The individual in silence is no longer an individual at all, they are a vessel seeking occupation. The ancients filled that vessel with gods, curses, laws. Modern systems fill it with ideologies, slogans, digital echoes. The desert was only the prototype. And so the silence beneath the sand was never absence. It was presence disguised as emptiness. A presence that fractures perception, strips the self, and prepares the soul for programming. You call it sacred, they called it divine. But the truth is simpler, it was the perfect laboratory and humanity has never escaped it. So when you listen to silence and feel that unease, ask yourself, is it emptiness you hear, or the first whisper of something waiting to replace you? The forgotten experiment of the soul. Beneath the pyramids, scattered in sealed chambers that tourists will never see, lie fragments of papyri no curator dares to display. They are not hymns, not prayers, but records, trial notes, equations in crude, diagrams of human figures with circles drawn around the skull and chest. They read less like scripture and more like data. The ancients were not merely burying kings, they were burying results. Modern psychology thinks it invented the idea of controlled experiment, but the evidence says otherwise. Consider the accounts of the opening of the mouth ritual. Officially, it was meant to restore the senses of the dead, touching the mouth, the eyes, the ears of the mummy with sacred tools so the soul might awaken in the afterlife. But hidden beneath its ceremonial surface is a pattern eerily close to what split-brain research in the 20th century revealed. Neuroscientists severing the corpus callosum found that one hemisphere could know and act without the other's awareness. Two selves could live in one skull, each blind to the other. The ritual's tools, designed to stimulate or open specific sensory gateways, may have been primitive attempts at probing consciousness itself. Ask yourself, why mimic speech, vision, hearing, if only for the dead, unless the ritual was first tested on the living? Unless the body lying on the slab was not yet fully lifeless? What if the priests were mapping the threshold between awareness and silence, recording how long the self lingered after breath ceased, measuring the split between body and soul? The papyri hint at it, notes on the duration of heartbeats after cessation, sketches of eyes dilating in torchlight, cryptic references to the second voice. These are not metaphors, they are observations. Think of the Milgram experiment again, but inverted. There, ordinary people obeyed authority to the point of inflicting harm. Here, authority cloaked in divinity may have ordered acolytes to become subjects, to endure procedures under the illusion of holiness. What the modern laboratory cloaks in science, the temple cloaked in religion. Both arrive at the same cruelty, the human mind stripped and observed, reshaped in the name of something greater. And the results, perhaps the most haunting, are the parallels with false memory research. Experiments in the 1990s proved that entire recollections could be implanted, events that never occurred, vividly remembered by participants as real. The Egyptian priests may not have had the terminology, but they had the method. Chanting in echoing chambers, deprivation in the desert, overwhelming geometry, the subject left not with their own memories, but with the gods' memories grafted into their identity. The papyri hint that the afterlife was not a promise but a program. Implant the soul with a map, ensure the subject carried obedience even beyond death. This is why the Gnostic texts, buried and banned centuries later, warn that the afterlife itself is a prison of archons. It is not liberation but continuation of the same experiment, scaled across eternity. The Pharaoh was not granted eternal life as reward, he was used as data, a test case for how long consciousness can be trapped in architecture, in geometry, in silence. Every sarcophagus is less a coffin than a controlled chamber. If you still doubt, remember the modern studies of near-death experiences. Patients clinically dead report tunnels of light, presences, overwhelming commands to return or surrender. Neuroscientists attribute this to cortical discharges and oxygen deprivation. But what if these phenomena were mapped thousands of years ago, codified and weaponized? What if the weighing of the soul was not judgment, but observation, an experiment repeated endlessly in chambers that still hum beneath the sand? And if consciousness can be fractured, implanted, reshaped, then the question grows darker. How much of what you call your soul is your own? The veins of stone. Walk deeper into the pyramid and you find shafts so narrow that no human body could ever pass through them. They rise like veins through the massive stone, stretching outward toward the stars. Archaeologists call them air shafts, though no breath moves through them. Others insist they are alignments to Orion, to Sirius, to the pole star. But if you trace them as a map, you realize they form not ventilation and not astronomy, but circuitry. The pyramid is less a tomb than a machine. Stone conducts not only weight but vibration. Strike granite and it hums with frequencies that can travel through the entire structure. These narrow channels amplify that resonance, directing it with precision, shaping it into patterns that are neither natural nor accidental. Imagine a colossal tuning fork, each shaft a pathway for sound, for energy, for something meant not for the dead, but for the living mind standing within its walls. Modern science stumbled upon this in the 20th century with Gonsfeld experiments. Subjects placed in environments of uniform sound and light, their senses flooded with monotony, quickly entered altered states of consciousness. They reported visions, disembodied voices, even contact with presences beyond themselves. The shafts of the pyramid perform a darker variation. They do not flood the senses with monotony, they fracture them with resonance. They turn silence into vibration, light into geometry, air into corridors of suggestion. The initiate inside is no longer a stable self, but an instrument being played. Consider also the phenomenon of binaural beats. When two frequencies are played, one in each ear, the brain produces a third tone that does not exist in the air but only in perception. Neuroscientists show this entrains brainwaves, altering mood, inducing trance. Now place yourself in a chamber where shafts direct frequencies from different directions, where chants reverberate against stone until harmonics multiply and overlap. The brain begins to generate tones that never existed, experiences that feel divine but are nothing more than interference patterns in flesh. The gods, then, are not presences from above, but illusions born of resonance. History conceals this under myth. The priests declared these shafts pathways for the soul, guiding the Pharaoh's essence to the stars. But hidden in the metaphor is the truth. The human mind, exposed to pattern vibration, projects outward. The sense of leaving the body, of ascending, of merging with Orion, all are side effects of neuroacoustic manipulation. What they called immortality was the predictable hallucination of a nervous system hacked by stone. The danger is not confined to the ancient world. Even today, studies of electromagnetic fields show that low-level oscillations near the temporal lobe trigger sensations of presence, visions, uncanny dread. Michael Persinger's God helmet proved that by stimulating specific brain regions with magnetic pulses, subjects reported contact with entities, often interpreting them as divine. The pyramids, with their veins of stone, may have been the first helmets built not for one skull but for an entire civilization. And so the curse written in stone is not a warning but a demonstration. If you control the environment, you control the soul. By shaping resonance, by carving channels, by aligning mass with starfields, you do not imprison the dead, you reprogram the living. The Pharaoh's eternity was never his own. It was an artifact of a machine that demanded the soul conform to its geometry and hum its frequencies forever. So ask yourself this: when you look at the pyramid rising against the desert sky, are you seeing stone, or the first machine built to rewire the human mind? The language of the dead. Every culture buries its kings, but only Egypt wrapped their corpses in libraries. Rows upon rows of papyri carved sarcophagi covered in spells, walls etched with texts that spiral endlessly in funerary chambers. Archaeologists call them books of the dead, guides for the soul through the afterlife. But the more closely you read, the more they resemble something else entirely, scripts, not prayers, not poetry, but instructions. Page after page, the dead are told what to say, what to deny, what to repeat at the gates of judgment. I have not stolen, I have not lied, I have not killed. Over and over the same denials. This is not spirituality, this is programming. In psychology, repetition under stress imprints memory in a way ordinary learning never can. Consider how military training drills commands until the body obeys automatically, bypassing thought. The funerary texts do the same. They drill the soul to perform on command in a trial beyond death. The afterlife is presented not as freedom, but as interrogation. Think of the false memory experiments of Elizabeth Loftus. Subjects told repeatedly that they had been lost in a mall as children came to believe it vividly, sincerely, despite the event never happening. Suggestion corrodes memory until fiction becomes live truth. The Book of the Dead functions the same way. The soul told endlessly that it is innocent begins to believe it, begins to inhabit the script provided. In the afterlife, there is no space for memory, only the script. The dead are no longer themselves. They are actors reciting lines etched in stone. This raises a darker possibility. What if the purpose of mummification and funerary texts was not to preserve the person but to erase them, to overwrite identity with ritual code so thoroughly that no fragment of the original consciousness remained? The pharaoh does not live forever. The pharaoh is annihilated and replaced with a ritual construct that can survive in the architecture of eternity. Immortality is not survival, it is replication. And this aligns with what modern philosophy fears in the thought experiment of the brain in a vat. If all your experiences, thoughts, and memories can be simulated, how would you ever know? If the soul in the afterlife only recalls the scripts given to it, is it truly alive or merely a recording endlessly looping in stone? The ancients built the first vats not of wires and fluids, but of tombs and texts. The Gnostic heresies condemned this. They claimed the gods of Egypt and their successors were not liberators, but jailers, trapping souls in false cycles of judgment. The Nag Hammadi scrolls describe archons demanding rehearsed confessions, punishing deviation, rewarding obedience. What archaeologists call mythology reads instead like rebellion against a system of posthumous control. The soul that follows the script never escapes. The soul that resists is annihilated. Eternity is not paradise. It is compliance without end. Modern neuroscience whispers the same unease. Split-brain patients demonstrate that memory and identity are not unified. One hemisphere can believe, act, even confess what the other denies. Which self then is judged? The ritual texts exploit this fracture, scripting the confessions for one side of the soul while silencing the other. Identity collapses into compliance. The dead cannot resist because the self is already divided. And here lies the unspoken terror. If eternity is scripted, then what you call you may already be nothing but a performance learned long ago. Perhaps your denials, your convictions, even your sense of innocence, are lines you were taught to repeat by a system that began thousands of years ago, etched first into the walls of a desert tomb. So when you speak to yourself in silence and insist, "I am not guilty," how do you know it is your voice, and not the echo of the Book of the Dead still reading itself through you? The weight of the feather. In the heart of Egyptian belief lies an image deceptively simple, the soul weighed against a feather. If the heart is light, it passes into eternity. If heavy, it is devoured. Children's books present it as justice, a divine balance between truth and sin. But in the hidden library, the scale does not symbolize morality, it symbolizes measurement. To weigh a heart is to reduce the soul to data. This was not myth but methodology. The priests devised a system where the immeasurable conscience, memory, truth could be quantified, judged, and archived. Every denial carved into the Book of the Dead, every chant rehearsed in the echoing chamber was preparation for this moment, not to be free but to be assessed. The afterlife was not an endless field of reeds, it was an experiment in metrics. Modern science repeats this with different tools. Polygraph tests claim to measure truth by monitoring sweat, pulse, tremors. Neuroimaging scans claim to detect lies through patterns of blood flow. And yet both are flawed, not because the methods are crude, but because truth is not something that can be weighed. Still, the attempt persists as if humans are desperate to compress morality into numbers, into mechanical verdicts. Egypt pioneered this obsession. The feather was the first machine of judgment. Consider also the Milgram experiment once more. Obedience was measured not by belief, but by compliance with commands. The priests turned obedience into data. How easily does the subject confess? How seamlessly do they recite the script? How convincingly do they deny sin? The scale is less about cosmic justice and more about calibrating the degree of control achieved in life. Eternity is granted not to the innocent, but to the perfectly programmed. There is also the cruel paradox buried in the symbol. The heart is weighed not against stone, not against law, but against a feather, the lightest possible object. The test is unwinnable because nothing can be lighter than nothing. Guilt is not what dooms you, existence itself dooms you. To have lived is to weigh more than absence. The scale is a trap disguised as fairness. Philosophy mirrors this in the paradox of original sin. You are guilty simply by being born. You are placed in a system where failure is predetermined, where the test does not reveal but condemns. And yet you obey because the image of balance soothes you with the illusion of fairness. The feather is not justice, it is theater. And when psychology examines guilt, it finds something even darker. False confession studies show that under pressure, subjects admit to crimes they never committed simply to escape interrogation. The soul before the scales does the same. It denies, it pleads, it conforms to the script until it collapses into compliance. What is weighed is not truth, but the subject's breaking point. Now recall the geometry, the resonance, the silence. All of it leads here to this symbolic machine where the soul is processed like grain on a balance, and whether it passes or fails does not matter because both outcomes serve the system. A compliant soul is recycled into eternity, a resisting soul is annihilated. Either way, the data is collected. So the haunting question remains. If the weight of a soul can be measured, then is your conscience truly your own, or just another variable in an experiment still running beneath the desert sand? The story you were told is already gone. The pharaohs were not gods, not kings, not mystics. They were the first subjects in a laboratory older than history. Their pyramids were not tombs but instruments, their funerary texts not prayers but scripts, their rituals not worship but experiments. Geometry, silence, resonance, repetition, these were not symbols of divinity. They were controls, variables, trials in a study whose purpose was never resurrection but domination. And still you believed the myth. Still you called them wonders of the world, monuments to eternity, proof of greatness. But what if eternity itself was the curse? What if immortality is not survival, but entrapment, the endless looping of a program etched into stone, carved into flesh, burned into memory? You thought you were standing outside history, studying it like an artifact, but history was studying you. The same illusions carved into granite are carved into your mind every day. Architecture that dwarfs you, systems that script you, rituals that fracture your perception until you no longer remember what it felt like to belong to yourself. The curse was never in the hieroglyphs, it was in the gaze. To look upon the stone is to surrender to it, to inherit the fracture it carries. Every monument you pass, every word you repeat without questioning, every silence that reshapes you in the dark, all of it is the pyramid alive, still working, still feeding. You are no longer separate from it, you are its continuation. And so the final truth does not fall into your hands, it falls through you. You are not deciphering a forbidden manuscript, you are the page it was carved upon. Every thought you claim as your own was scripted long before you could resist. If memory is only an inscription, if identity is only repetition, then tell me whose hand has been writing you all along.